Good afternoon, everyone. Tackling advanced threat landscape with managed detection and response. So before we get into this topic, let's look at the current cybersecurity threat landscape. So number one, globally industry is observing increased threat actor activity, which is related to the advanced persistent threat. It could be a state-sponsored APTs, right? You can name 10, 33, okay, TAC, 38, all those things. Second thing is ransomware attacks are on rise, right? Day in, day out, there are certain actually news which talks about compromising the critical information infrastructure. That's the second. Third, if you look at for the past 12 to 24 months, we are also seeing multiple critical vulnerabilities, zero-day vulnerabilities reported on various product and solution, right? This is one of the reasons is a tool or the product sprawling, multiple technologies used by the organizations, right? So wherein they'll have to keep a track of which all the vulnerabilities associated with which product are they impacted, how do they mitigate, how do they remediate those vulnerabilities. This is the third one. Fourth one, if you look at, I think two large supply chain attack. One is SolarWinds, second is Kaseya, right? This is the indirect attack on large tech firms. They compromise the organization tech firms through which whoever subscribe the tools or the softwares, right, across the globe, they gain the access. These all predominantly, if you look at 3 to 4 trend that we are witnessing across the globe. Now, today's agenda is let's look at what are all the gaps in traditional threat detection and response. Second, when we talk about the managed detection and response, what is the reference model given by the Gartner, right? How do you augment threat detection and response? Second, I thought of sharing some of the best practices related to MDR, which means what is that 5A approach? I'll also talk about, I'll spend some time on 5A approach. Then we need to embrace MITRE attack framework to detect the threats proactively, right? So we will also see in the threat detection and response life cycle at the various level, how do we leverage effectively the MITRE attack framework? I'll talk about that. Then on the whole, the gamut of the managed detection and response, cyber threat intelligence is the key. If you look at today, threat intel feeds are kind of a deluge. So much of information available coming from various sources, right? It could be open source, it could be like a OSINT or commercial feeds. The advisories coming from regulators, the agencies, OEMs. What do we do with that? Are they credible? Are they reliable? If I need to leverage this threat intel, what is the best practice around that? So we look at that. Then continuous improvement, I will also talk about some of the key takeaways. So gaps in the traditional threat detection and response, if you look at as per the survey given by the IBM in 2022, on an average, the dwell time is somewhere between 6 months to 9 months time to effectively detect any sort of incidents and contain the incident, right? This is where it talks about. What could be the causes, various causes? If you look at, I have just plotted into the incident detection and response 5 cycles, right? Collect, detect, analyze, respond, and recover. If you look at the collect, lack of log sources, lack of visibility, lack of telemetry information, right? If there is an expectation from the MDR to detect all sort of attack, then we need to make sure that it has visibility of your heterogeneous IT estate, non-IT, it could be OT environment. If you leverage the cloud, SaaS or any of the cloud platform, PaaS, whatever it is, are you ingesting those logs into your MDR for this analysis? And anywhere if you look at organization is using 20 to 40 various network and security technologies, right? Each and everything has got an individual console. There is a monitoring takes place. You have a process, right? Do you have a holistic view across the product crawling for your SOC to have a holistic view and the threat detection and response? So these all some of the things could be the cause. Again, detection part, if you look at, it is not about It's more of like a dependency on static use cases, right? When you onboard or when you start the SOC, start with some asset specific use cases and leave it there. But what is the risk? Considering today's cyber security threat landscape, which is very dynamic, volatile, we see the multiple critical vulnerabilities, 0-day, there is a threat actor activities, increased threat actor activity, which means this particular use cases need to be enhanced constantly to have a overall the preventive and detective capability. That's one gap. Then again on the analyze part, if you look at alert fatigue I talked about, right? So much of actually product tooling implemented, are they actually integrated, whether the SOC has got a holistic view, that's a challenge. Now response part, when we actually focus on improving the detective preventive capability, it is important for our organization to have a response capability, right? How quickly the organization has got the ability to basically contain this incident. That is where the SOAR coming into picture, right? There is a lack of SOAR implementation automation part. Then recovery part, because of the multiple product, these all managed in silos. There is a broken processes when it comes to the incident. These are all some of the key challenges, gaps in the traditional, the threat detection mechanism. Now, what does Gartner say when talk about this managed detection and response? They are talking about the three pillar, right? The collection, of course, it's your network, IT, non-IT environment. Then you bring the visibility from identity and authentication related services. Then you have a cloud subscription, integrate those cloud subscription with the MDR solution to have a visibility. Then, of course, it should have a inbuilt capability of the AI and ML, more analytics, right? This analytics need to happen from singular data like source. That's where the analysis part coming into picture. Then when it comes to the incident response, detection and incident response capability, of course, it talks about the detection, response, recovery part, the strong threat intel part. This is the reference model given by the Gartner. Now let's spend some time on what is that 5 I's approach. When I say the 5 I, first thing is identify. Organization need to identify the crown jewels, right, from the heterogeneous environment of IT, their network. This is where it should not be limited to only meeting the compliance requirement or just for a namesake of monitoring few critical devices, right? It should have a visibility of, you need to identify when we say the crown jewels, internet facing critical applications, critical systems, again, your network related assets. If you have a cloud subscription, cloud assets, then the endpoint visibility, this is important. Second is ingest. Once you identify the crown jewels, critical infrastructure, then ingest the logs from all, whatever we defined, right? Crown jewels. That's where, because this is important. MDR should have a visibility of your critical infrastructure. It covers IT, non-IT as well as the cloud and endpoint systems. Then the improve the logs. This is where enrichment coming into place, where you need to have a credible threat intelligence for basically to do the enrichment on the log sources ingested, matching with some of the historical pattern, then again the known, the suspicious activity, right? The enrichment happened on the third, improve logs. Then the investigation part. You should have again inbuilt capability of machine learning, artificial intelligence basically to detect some of the known attacks as well as the predictive analysis need to be done. This is basically to prevent from proliferation of attack information and then response, be prepared to respond to this particular attack. The final, the I is involved, right? This is where the involving the human expertise for threat response as well as effectively leveraging automation to improve the operational efficiency. That is one part, which means automation can be used in two ways. One, do as a part of the enrichment, alert enrichment part. Second thing is use the SOAR, security orchestration and automation for doing a containment activity. When there is a malicious communication, right? Be it inbound or the outbound, right? Which is matching with your threat intel and the threat intel flags, this particular IP is involved in a nefarious activity without going through the manual process of navigating through various teams, right? Blocking at the firewall level, you can have a playbook to basically block the IP at the perimeter level, firewall level. Similar way, anything related to the IOC related actions, be it the hashes or blocking the URL, these all you can have a playbook. That is where SOAR is going to help on response part, how quickly you will be able to do the containment actions moment you have certain information about the insights. So if you look at the MDR fabric, it has got 3 layers. The bottom one is the data collection layer, right? This is where we spoke about organization need to identify critical assets and then the ingest the critical assets to this MDR. Second, the middle one is the enrichment layer. This is where threat intel is going to play an important role. Next slide, I will also talk about how one has to curate the threat intel feeds coming from the various sources, and then how you can make it as a credible and actionable intelligence, because that is important. All the actions done by the SOC, that is actually revolving around the strong, credible cyber threat intelligence, right? This is where organization need to spend time in making sure that this is a credible intel so that 100% you can go for the automation. Otherwise, you will end up having a noise blocking some of the legit IPs, right, at the various level, which will create the noise. So this is very, very important. Then the third one is the orchestration and automation layer. Now, cyber threat intelligence for proactive, basically threat detection, right? So if you look at, I talked about curating the cyber threat intelligence, right, from various sources. Now, say for example, you get cyber threat intel feeds from various sources. Look at the left side, right? So it has got the commercial feeds, and whichever the segment you are operating, you might be getting a sectoral or the regulatory related feeds. That can be one source. Then in-house, if you have any capability of threat research team, analyst team, who is constantly hunting to gather these information, that could be your in-house. Then the open source intelligence feeds are available. Then whatever intelligence you get it from the dark web, deep web, that can be added. Then the research analyst, right? These all the raw data getting into the threat intel platform. This is where you need to create your enrichment, right, to decide on the verdict. Basically on the bad reputation IPs, moderate, and the good reputation IPs, right? Now, based on the threat reputation criteria, you will actually give a verdict on these all the IPs, IOCs, right? It could be other things involved in a nefarious activity. Now, what is the outcome? The enriched high confidence feeds can be integrated with your SIEM, your MDR solution, SOC, then EDR, endpoint detection and response. That's one. Second thing is, once you make the curated and credible intelligence, second thing is, you should have a contextual threat intel feeds, right? The internal stakeholders cannot be flooded with so much of advisory, because as I mentioned, it's a kind of a deluge. So you should know your IT environment, your OT environment, what all product, what all versions, right? So from the security team, the advisory should be contextual, basis the applicability of the organization, so that the IT or the network team, they'll be able to map within that estate, identify the impacted assets, coming up with a plan for the mitigation. This is very, very important. Otherwise, initially they will look at 5, 10, 15. The moment it becomes 100 advisories, they will stop looking at, right? That's why the contextual advisory is very, very key. If they receive it, it is actionable for them, because you are not flooding or broadcasting the advisory. This is contextual based on the organization asset. This is very, very important. Second thing. Third is, of course, the exposure monitoring, right? While we putting various controls on, protecting the enterprise estate, you need to keep eyes and ears on the public domains, right? That's where the exposure monitoring coming into place of monitoring your brands, monitoring your domains, monitoring your mobile applications, any negative campaign or any sort of hate speeches going on in dark web, deep web, or any data related to your organization available in any of the third-party forums or the dark web. These all can be this exposure. You can actually get the insights from brand monitoring or the exposure monitoring service, that intelligence. Then, now you have a contextual threat intel advisories. You know what is applicable for the organization. Then you also get the various APT, ransomware related IOCs are available, right? Advisories are available. Now, analysts should have a view on that particular platform to do any sort of search, to basically pull out any point in time applicable IOCs, okay, so that they can action. So this is very, very key. This is what going to determine how your response process would be. Now next is, key thing is embracing the MITRE attack framework to detect threats efficiently. First thing is correlation and analytics engine, right? So this, as I mentioned, initially when you start this basically SOC, the MDR, the primary focus would be on creating asset specific use cases or the basic standard use cases, right? But this has to be constantly evolved time to time to improve the detective capability. When I say three things we need to do, one is once you create the asset specific, do the cross correlation between the various assets, right? Proxy to firewall, domain controller to firewall, basically the similar way the other endpoint system to firewall, so that the accuracy level will be very high. You will be able to detect the suspicious activity. So cross correlation rules need to be created. Second, based on some of the sector specific threat actor activities, look at the TTPs, tactics, again the techniques, the processes. Now you see which all basically techniques it falls on the MITRE framework. You will have to create MITRE aligned use cases as a part of your MDR so that you will have a detection capability. Third aspect is now so many actually 0 days or the critical vulnerabilities are published, right? Say for example, Log4j, Spring4Shell, recently MoveIT, this is being exploited in the wild, right? As we speak, still there are certain attempts related to Log4j happening, right? Because this is something the code embedded at the application layer, right? Not at the surface level. Organizations are still struggling to identify which all systems wherein this particular Log4j related components were added, right? Which means once you understand the pattern, once you create the use cases in the MDR, at least you will have a detection capability. If any active attempt of exploiting these critical vulnerability, you will be able to detect and notify organization, yes, there are some active attempts on these critical vulnerabilities. Can you please look at these systems and prioritize the patching? So this way, you will make the use cases, the policies are dynamic, in line with cyber basically threat context, as well as it's also addressing some of the key vulnerabilities. That's one. Second is cyber threat intel. I spoke about that, contextual advisories, and then like providing the IOC related information. Third is hunting, right? We as a security professionals, we are all battling basically to tackle unknown unknowns, right? Known predominantly covered by the tooling, the products, it has got a signatures. Known, unknown, this is where your credible threat intel is going to help having those mechanisms, those IOCs in place to have a proactive detections. But where you have to focus is how do we identify the unknown. That is where you need to go beyond the use cases, what is configured on the systems. You create, again, when we talk about the threat hunting, there are three things, right? One is IOC based retrospect hunting. Whenever there is a threat intel advisories, okay, once you validate the credibility of this advisory, pick up the known IOCs, indicators of compromises, which is basically IP, again the domain, URL, or the hashes, right? Now, in my estate environment, I need to see, am I affected or do I see any sort of the sign communicating with basically this known nefarious IPs. This is where you can have a playbook, picking the IOCs, do the retrospect hunting on the log estate, which is ingested with your MDR solution, so that within few minutes you will have a view, okay? There is a attack, there is a advisory published, somewhere, someplace it had happened. Now I picked up those things, checked the reputation part. I have done a retrospect hunting going back for past 2 weeks time. There is no matches in my environment. That gives a comfort, as well as a proactive, pick up those IOCs, implement at various level, create the watch list in SIM, block those IPs URL at the firewall level, add the hashes at the endpoint security level. So the protection mechanism also built basically to detect in future, right? This is one. Second is hypothesis based threat hunting. Hypothesis is nothing but assuming that threat actor has gained the access to your environment. Already they are in. Now, how do you basically eliminate that you are not impacted, they did not gain access, right? This is where you pick up sector specific, say for example, if you are a banker, BFSI, there are certain threat actor activities predominantly targeting banking or the healthcare, right? Pick up those. Create the hypothesis. So hypothesis when you create, you will have to look at the advisory, extract all the indicators of attacks. Indicators of attacks, create the hypothesis, run it with various actually your log sources to see, eliminate, okay, this we are not impacted. Second scenario tested, we are not impacted. Then that will give a conclusion, because here when you do the hypothesis based hunting, you are going beyond the policies, use cases or the signatures what is available on the tooling or the product. That's the second thing. Third aspect is situational based hunting, right? If I need to give an example, just like 18 months back, this geopolitical crisis between Russia and Ukraine, right? Though initially it was seen as the military invasion, but predominantly it was a cyber war, right? It actually raised three scenarios, geopolitical crisis. Russia targeting Ukraine, right? Cyber war. Again, it could be a DDoS, ransomware attack, bringing down the government, the critical infrastructure. To retaliate, Ukraine targeting Russia, the critical infrastructure. Now, Russia targeting the NATO, who are supporting Ukraine, right? There are three scenarios. If you look at as an organization, you will fall on any one of the category, right? Which means whatever happened between these two countries, the scenario, that threat scenario is very much applicable for the critical information infrastructure operating across the globe, the banks, healthcare. Now we need to look at, closely watch those such scenarios, pick up all the threat intel advisories, follow through the process of IOC based threat hunting. Second is hypothesis based threat hunting to see, yes, you are not actually impacted, and pick up those IOCs and do that actions at various levels so that you have a proactive detection and the mitigation capability. Next is on the response part. Next is on the response part. We spoke about threat actor TTPs, right? So now, based on the detection, MDR detections, if there is a match on specific actually threat actor group TTPs, use the playbook to do the automation part for the containment. The fifth one is, how do we measure the effectiveness? This is very, very important. If you look at any organization, at least the security solution per se, 15 to 20 would have implemented at various levels, right? You have a policies, you created the use cases. How do you test the effectiveness? This is where red teaming is going to help, wherein the red teamer will mimic the attack scenario in line with the MITRE, and then they carry out all the MITRE aligned basically attack scenarios. The MDR or the SOC team will act as a blue team, wherein they need to demonstrate how capable are they basically to detect these sort of attack scenarios. This is very, very important. Now, post the red teaming exercise, what is the key takeaway is, both the teams should come together. Red teaming should present on what all scenario they have tested. Blue team needs to talk about the defense, how effective they were able to detect, prevent the various scenarios. Wherever there is a gaps, that gives three basically inputs for you to basically enhance. Improving the log visibility. You are getting a log, but you are not able to detect. That's where you need to look at the logic, the use cases, right? Anything need to be tuned basically to detect, right? Some places you may not have a visibility. This is where you will have to bring in the visibility. So this I have put basically in the threat detection and response cycle, aligning the MITRE, right? One needs to actually embrace the MITRE attack framework for effective threat detection part. So leveraging the analytics part, when we talk about the SOC, two things, right? One is a time to detect, second part is time to respond. Time to detect, on the left side you will see MDR, when we talk about the MDR, ideally it should have these all the component, right? The credible, strong threat intelligence, it needs to have a user and entity behavior analysis, NDR capability, it should have an inbuilt SOAR capability, right? Now on the right side, if you look at speed to respond, one of the things is like security automation workflow to investigate entries, that particular logs, and then like we need to have a workflow to do the automation part, right? I spoke about various scenarios. Automation you can do for enriching the alert as a part of L1 activity. Second thing is you need to do the containment part as well, right? If any malicious traffic without manual intervention, blocking at the firewall level, that is one of the playbook, SOAR playbook you can implement. Blocking the hashes at the EDR level, you can do that. URL web proxy level, you can do that. Or any sort of user related repeated policy violation activity, blocking at the firewall level. Phishing, it is a multi-pronged approach. User awareness, then again blocking the malicious, basically the email at the gateway level, then submitting the sample to the vendor. These all you can create the playbook and you can do the automation basically to make this entire process efficient. So last one is the continuous improvement. You can look at always, this is one, but 3 key takeaways. So if you need to measure the MDR effectiveness, right, what you need to do, number 1, pick up the 1 month, what all the threat intel advisories are published, comprising the various threats, right? Which all threats you are able to detect as a part of your MDR capability. That will give you a clear idea. Are you lagging on the use cases? Are you lagging on the log sources visibility, so that you can improve that. Second is, we spoke about effectiveness of the controls. You need to do the red teaming, blue teaming exercise, right? To mimic the attack scenarios to see how effective are these control. That's the second scenario. Third is SOC maturity assessment. So what you need to do is, this is again, you need to, over a period of time, you need to assess the overall maturity of the SOC, right? When we talk about the maturity, people, process, technology, it can be in 2 ways, right? One is a qualitative assessment on the process part in terms of what all technology, what all solutions we have, we can put a tick mark. Then you need to have a scoring for effectiveness of each of this actually technology and policies, right? Now with that, combine that, already there is a framework available in Gartner. Gartner SOC maturity model, it actually defines in the scale of 1 to 5 based on various technologies you have implemented. Now one more thing what you need to add is, don't look at direct like a technology mapping alone. You need to look at the process effectiveness, people effectiveness, skill set, training, are they equipped to do the forensics, are they equipped to do the threat hunting activity, and then pick up your red teaming exercise effectiveness score. Then you will be able to arrive in the scale of 1 to 5 today, where do you stand when it comes to the SOC maturity on the MDR. With that note, I conclude the session. Thank you.